shoes, check out the white shoes, check out the white
Dad,
shoes.
what's for dinner?
White shoes, check out the white shoes, check out the white shoes.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Dad, What's for Dinner. Today I'll be showing you guys how to make my meatloaf with a ketchup based sauce on top. But before we get started, go ahead and like and subscribe and leave a comment in the comment section below. All right, let's go. And of course, guys, first things first, we always start with the ingredients. So this list of ingredients here, this is just for the actual meatloaf itself. This isn't for the sauce. But of course, we're gonna need some ground beef. So I got I got 3 pounds of ground beef here, 93% lean. You can go with 85% or 90. It's up to you, your preference. I have, excuse me, 1 onion here. We're gonna do 3 large eggs, 4 tablespoons of ketchup, and again, this is just for the meatloaf itself. 4 tablespoons of the parsley, 1 cup of the panko breadcrumbs, 2 teaspoons of salt, 2 teaspoons of Italian seasonings here, and 1 teaspoon of pepper, and half a teaspoon of paprika. And again, the Italian seasoning, that's just like oregano, thyme, basil, rosemary, and sage. So if you don't have this, you can just, if you have some of these ingredients, just mix them up and just make your own little blend there. All right, guys, and for the sauce, we're just gonna do 1 cup of ketchup, 2 teaspoons of white vinegar, 3 tablespoons of the brown sugar, 1 teaspoon of the garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of onion powder, and just half a teaspoon each of the black pepper and salt. And again, this is for our sauce that's gonna go on top of the meatloaf. All right, guys, so the first thing we wanna do is dice those onions up. I'm dicing them up pretty small, pretty fine. So when they cook in the actual meatloaf, they actually get cooked. If you dice them too big, they won't really cook down all the way, and you'll get some raw onion in there. You can also, if you don't want to dice them real small, I'm just kind of breaking these down right now. But also, if you don't want to dice them real small, you can actually saute them first before adding them to your meatloaf and mixing it into your meatloaf. Now I'm just going to kind of break these down here because they're kind of, they get kind of stuck together. But break these down a little bit because that's going to go into our meatloaf. And these are pretty small. So, I mean, if you look here, let me grab a small piece. If you look there, that's pretty small, and that should cook down into the meatloaf, give it some good flavor. But like I said, if you prefer bigger onions, you can just kind of saute them first before adding them to your meatloaf. Now it's time to actually put the meatloaf together. So we're just gonna throw our 3 pounds of ground beef in a decent sized bowl. You wanna get a pretty decent size so you can kind of mix it around without spilling everything outside the side of the bowl. But the first thing we're gonna do, we're gonna add our onions. All right, so our onions going in. All right, next we're gonna add our eggs. So that's 2 eggs, we're gonna add our 3rd egg. We're gonna add our 4 tablespoons of parsley. Here's 1, 2, 3. I'm gonna do about 4 tablespoons of ketchup. I'm just gonna measure by eye here. All right, and we got our 1 cup of the panko breadcrumbs. Remember, the egg and the breadcrumbs act as a binder to keep your meatloaf from falling apart and holding it all together. Now, I forgot to mention, at this point, you could be preheating your oven to 375 degrees. We're actually gonna cook this meatloaf for about 45 minutes, 40 to 45 minutes, depending on how much ground beef you're using. If you're gonna do like maybe 2 pounds of ground beef, let's say 40. 3 pounds of ground beef, we'll say 45 to 50 minutes before we add our sauce to the top. And then we're gonna cook it a little longer once that sauce is added to it. So now we're just adding our salt. So we're gonna do 2 teaspoons. So there's 1, and here's 2. And our 2 teaspoons of Italian seasoning. So here's 1, and here's 2. Our 1 teaspoon of black pepper. Next, we're gonna add our half a teaspoon of paprika. And remember, guys, you can add as much or as little as you want, just kind of make it your own. and to your own taste. Again, if you guys haven't done so, go ahead and preheat your oven to 375. Guys, so now we're gonna mix. You wanna mix it pretty thoroughly to get all those ingredients mixed in there, all the egg in there, all the breadcrumbs in there. I'm trying to do this one-handed and keep this pot from slipping around. It's a little difficult. You also don't wanna over-mix it because if you do, it'll actually get your, it'll make your meatloaf pretty stiff. And you don't want that either. So I'm gonna put this camera down and I'm gonna mix it. You can also use it if you have some of the food preparation gloves. You can just mix it by hand, or you can mix it by hand. Make sure your fingernails aren't dirty, so you're not getting all that crud and stuff to your family's food. But hey, do you? I'm gonna put this down and mix this. I'm just gonna use a spoon just to get it all kind of mixed together. Make sure it's going along nicely. Again, don't over mix it so you don't get your meatloaf tough. I'm gonna cut and mix this real quick. All right guys, so that's the finished product there. It's all mixed up. So we're gonna get our tray out or a pan out. You can also do this like on a baking sheet I've seen people do. Just kind of form it out, you can cook it that way. I got a glass, some glass cookware I'm just gonna sit that in. And we're gonna cook it for 40 minutes. All right guys, so I have my glass cookware here. Normally you can use like a loaf pan. You can also even put some parchment paper down if you're wanting to pull your meatloaf out of the pan. We're gonna eat ours out of this pan, so I'm not gonna put any parchment paper down, and we're just gonna let it cook in here. The hamburger is usually so greasy and fatty that it's not gonna really stick much. You might get some sticking around the sides, especially when you have the sauce on top. But so we're just gonna pour the meat into this pan and get it nice and formed. All right, we got the meat poured into our pan here, so I'm just gonna kind of spread this out evenly in the pan just with my spoon here. Just get that flattened out to a nice little shape. Go around the edges and kind of make those edges out. All right, got that flattened out pretty good. All right, once that oven's preheated, we're going to go ahead and toss it in the oven and cook it for 40 minutes. All right, so the meatloaf is in the oven. I'm just gonna go sit back and relax for about 30-35 minutes, and then I'll come back and mix that sauce up. The sauce is real quick and easy, doesn't take too long. Then we'll get that meatloaf out of the oven, add the sauce, and then we're gonna cook it for about another 20-25 minutes, depending on how much ground beef you used. But it's a real simple recipe, guys. Make sure you like and subscribe. Leave any comments, any feedback for me in the comment section. But let's do this. All right, guys, it's been about 35 minutes, so this meatloaf's getting ready to come out. So we're gonna whip together this sauce real quick. So again, we need 1 cup of ketchup, 2 teaspoons of white vinegar, 3 tablespoons of brown sugar, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1 teaspoon of onion powder, a half a teaspoon of black pepper, and a half a teaspoon of salt. So let's go ahead and get started. Guys, we've got our cup of ketchup. We're just gonna see if we can dump that in there. All right, 2 teaspoons of white vinegar. That's 1 and 2. All right, now 3 tablespoons of brown sugar. This is 1, 2, and 3. 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. 1 teaspoon of onion powder. Half a teaspoon of black pepper. That's a little more than half a teaspoon, but you get my point. And half a teaspoon of salt. And we're just gonna whisk all these ingredients together. I'm just using a little plastic fork here. I know that's not very environmentally friendly, but we're just gonna whisk that together, mix it all in. All right, so we're just mixing, getting all the little lumps and whatnot out of there. If you have little lumps from the brown sugar, that's totally fine. It'll all cook in. Again, make sure you're tasting as you're going along. Make sure this tastes to your liking. If you feel there's not enough onion powder, not enough garlic, go ahead and add a little more. Want a little more zing to it, add a little more the white vinegar. Want a little more sweetness, go ahead and add a little more brown sugar, whatever you guys want. But that's our sauce, so we're gonna pull this meatloaf out here in a second, and we'll get this on top. Might be a little too much sauce, but we can scrape some off if need be. All right, so the meatloaf's back in the oven. We're gonna let that cook for another 10 to 15 minutes.
Everyone was screaming, yelling. I just had to cover my ears. Like it was so.
How was it?
Good.
How is it?
Delicious.